like a nine wins the Derby.
This is Hyde Park in the heart of Sydney. For a whole week in 1810, amid parties, balls and much public drunkenness, a series of horse races was held on a rough-cut bush track. It was Australia's first official racing carnival, the birth of our oldest organised sport.
Royal Randwick, our oldest city racecourse and hallowed turf to those who revere the sport of kings.
The hearts of racing's true believers beat a little faster here, remembering those great finishes down the straight and past the post.
And Simon, you as a jockey many times on many racetracks would have heard the cheering crowds, the crack of the whips and the thundering hooves.
Certainly did, John. It was an amazing mixture of joy and disappointment, in victory and defeat, all part of the spirit of racing.
Well, let's look back now on 200 years of Australian racing. Come with us and remember the masterful jockeys, the skillful trainers and champion horses, the fearless gamblers, the hopeful owners and breeders, the race callers, the writers and poets, the aristocrats, empire builders, tricksters and clowns.
There's no doubt that the greatest attraction of thoroughbred racing is the thrill of the contest between the horses. But if horses are the heroes in this sport of kings, then jockeys are unquestionably its celebrities. Australia's earliest jockeys were the young squires, who challenged each other to match races over the rough roads of the early settlement in Sydney. As racing became our principal sporting entertainment in the 19th century, many celebrity jockeys emerged, the most outstanding being Tom Hales.
He was a wonderful judge of pace, and of course he was a straight back, no crouch seat in those days, and he was a master of his trade.
Hales is best remembered for his rides on the unbeaten champion Grand Flaneur, who won 9 major events, including 2 derbies and the 1880 Melbourne Cup. Bobby Lewis, seen here aboard one of his 4 Melbourne Cup winners, Petrobus in 1915, rode for 50 years, winning classic races in 4 states. For 25 of those years, he was associated with the legendary trainer James Scobie. One of Lewis's great rivals was the extremely talented Frank Dempsey, who was only 18 when he won this Caulfield Cup in 1917 aboard Bronzetti. He was associated with a long list of champions, including the brilliant Eurythmic, whose 37 wins included the 1920 Caulfield Cup, Dempsey's third. Over the centuries, Australian boys, small of stature but strong of heart, were encouraged into a world where small is not only beautiful, but one of the keys to success.
People said, you know, you should be a jockey, and because I was so small at a young age, when I was about 9, 10, and it all eventuated from there.
I remember when I'm 2, 3 riding ponies and going to the races, and I kept scrapbooks from the time I could probably write and talk, and I used to sit on the couch and whip the couch every Saturday. And
for generations, boys barely into their teens have left home and entered the tough and often unforgiving world of the apprentice.
Yeah, it was pretty tough, but you know, I think it holds you in good stead if you do a tough apprenticeship and you can come through it the other side. It always stands you in good stead.
The apprentice serves a 4-year indenture, learning the vital race riding skills such as how to judge pace. As well as mastering the skills of race riding, jockeys must also fight a constant battle to control their body weight.
Dehydration, sweating, wasting, fasting. I don't think I ever walked onto a racecourse feeling good, because, you know, I was always just dehydrated to the maximum.
On top of all the dangers and the pressure, the jockeys also perform under the watchful eye of racing's policemen, the stipendiary stewards. They can impose fines, suspensions and disqualifications. Success or failure can rest on a split-second decision.
Racing's become very competitive, and we don't go out there. We go out there and try and ride in the rules of racing, but sometimes things happen. That's only because adrenaline, you know, blood's pumping, and you do things within an instance, and things can happen.
Officially, jockeys are not permitted to bet, but some are known to supplement their income with bets placed quietly on horses they know are a good thing. George Moore was a notorious gambler.
George liked to bet, but which 95% of... I've met very few non-betters in the racing game. It's a gambling game, and George did like a bet. He had a limit.
Yeah, TJ said they should all bet, make them ride better.
Another form of income, especially in days when riding fees were low, was simple old-fashioned bribery. Far Lap's jockey Jim Pike, also a big gambler, declined a huge offer to stop the champion winning.
On the eve of the 1930 Melbourne Cup, Jim Pike had a knock on his hotel door on Sunday night, and the visitor offered him £10,000 to pull up the great horse Far Lap in the Cup.
Jim Pike had mastered the new crouching riding style invented by American Todd Sloan and pioneered by James Barden and New Zealander Les Todd Hewitt.
I thought old Jim was a great rider of horses. I never hit him. I never seen him hit a horse with a whip. Great hands and heels rider, and a wonderful rider. I think he's as good as I've ever seen old Jim.
Among Pike's contemporaries, Bill Duncan, who rode more than 800 winners, including the erratic Manfred, who was left 100 metres behind at the start of the 1925 AJC Derby, but still won.
Now here comes Peter Pan. He's after your Rambler, and he's catching him. He might do it.
Duncan also guided the great Peter Pan to his Melbourne Cup win in 1932.
Bill Duncan was lucky to stay on him when he got badly interfered with, and he got him balanced again, and of course he still won.
The other rising stars of the era were the Munro brothers, Jim and his younger brother Darby. Jim Munro won most of the top races. Many of his great triumphs came when he combined with the brilliant galloper Windbag, including a Melbourne Cup in 1925. But it was David Hugh Munro, or Darby as he was known, who's now regarded by many as one of the greatest of all time.
Darby was the most dashing. He'd take on things that no one else would dare. He'd try and get up on the inside of something, and his animal would be clipping their heels. How they didn't fall, I don't know.
Darby gave nothing away. He knew all the tricks, but no films in those days. You could get away with a fair bit. As a matter of fact, it was word of mouth in the jockey's room. If you went into an inquiry, whoever talked the best did the best.
So accomplished was Darby Munro that, according to his second wife Shirley, he was even able to win the Melbourne Cup on board Russia in 1946 while still drunk after an all-night party.
Several cold showers trying to sober him up. He drank coffee, and he also had she also gave him a couple of nips of brandy, which wouldn't have done him any good because he hadn't had a drink for months. He gave an absolute perfect exhibition of riding. Tells you how mighty he was. He rode the perfect race. He took Russia to the front and had bowled it in, and when he was returning to scale, he vomited all over Russia's mane.
After 3 Melbourne Cups, 5 AJC and Victoria Derbies, and a host of classic race wins, Darby retired in 1955 and trained a few horses at Randwick before his death in the mid-60s.
Tell me about this bloke. You thought of a name for him as yet?
Well, no, I haven't, Ken, tell you the truth.
Pretty hard to think of names for you.
You just mentioned one just a minute ago. It sounded all right.
Explore.
Explore.
By Willis. Oh, well, one of these days we might see him race under that name.
That's right.
The 1940s and 1950s were, by some judges' estimates, a golden era for riders in Australia.
Yeah, they used to have a saying in those days, you could throw the colours in the room and there'd be 10 jockeys you could put on that would do the job.
One of them was the much-admired and humble Billy Cook.
Rainbird goes along now on the outside and defeats at the line, running away now from Silver Link. Rainbird to the line, wins it from Silver Link. There's the smile of the face, Billy Cook first in the 1945 Melbourne Cup. The crowd full of expectation.
Bill was a lovely rider, and I think Bill Cook was the best front-running jockey I've ever seen. He had lovely hands.
I'm very pleased to have won the premiership today, but I think I'm very fortunate. If George Moore hadn't broke his leg, I think, well, Thompson and I would be racing for second place. Thank you.
Another jockey was Arthur Ward, who's said to have ridden more champions than any other rider, amongst them the tenacious stayer Red Craze.
Crowd are cheering, and Red Craze goes straight to the line. The win with a lot in hand from Evening Phil. 3rd inches away is Del Star, followed by Roman Holiday.
Jack Purtell won the Melbourne Jockeys Premiership 7 times. One of his 3 Melbourne Cup victories was aboard the mighty Rising Fast. Amazingly, he didn't ride a winner in Sydney. Among the other legends of that time was Jack Thompson, the first man to win a Sydney Jockeys Premiership while still an apprentice. Tomo, as he was known in a 50-year career, had a staggering 3,322 victories, a record broken in 2008, coincidentally by a country jockey named Robert Thompson. Amazingly, a Melbourne Cup win eluded Jack. He finished runner-up on 3 occasions. However, he always firmly believed he'd snatched victory in the last stride aboard Dark Man over Rimfire in the 48 Cup. It was later revealed that the camera at Flemington that day was faulty. Here's rare footage of Tomo with trainer Frank Dalton talking race tactics with Ken Howard.
Oh yes, every race is run different, Ken. You couldn't go out and say that you were how you were going to ride a horse. You just sort of make up your mind as it progresses.
A prince of the saddle during that golden era was Athol George Mully, the rider of such champions as Burnborough.
I think he was probably the best of my time, if you could keep him on the ball, you know, because he was a bit of a wanderer and that sort of thing, but he was a fantastic jockey. He was the right weight. He could ride anything, anyway. But he and I, we locked horns a bit, but that's natural, you know, the opposition.
The great rivalry between Mully and Moore even saw the 2 champs come to blows.
I was really hot under the collar because he had a go at me through one of the races. So I walked around and just hit him in the mouth. I said, here, now have a go now, and I belted him straight in the mouth.
Some say the best jockeys are those who win consistently, even when they're not with the best stables or riding the best horses.
For a fellow like Quinton doesn't get the accolades. He was a champion jockey in Sydney 8 times or 9 times or something, and was never the leading rider for the #1 stable. Nobody else has done that in Sydney.
Roy Higgins won 11 Melbourne Jockeys Premierships, riding winners in more than 2,300 races, including 2 Melbourne Cups.
Roy Higgins was an absolute perfectionist in the saddle. He lacked nothing from vigour to riding a horse out hands and heels. He was the perfect jockey.
One of Higgins' contemporaries was Harry White, who notched up over 200 feature race wins, equalling Bobby Lewis's record of 4 Melbourne Cups. 2 were on Think Big, one aboard Arwan, and he had to work overtime to get Hyperno home in 1979 in the tightest of finishes.
Hyperno, Salamander, they hit the funny finish. Nearly a dead heat between Hyperno and Salamander. Nearly a dead heat between the pair of them.
Queensland has spawned a host of brilliant jockeys, including the Rockhampton-born Mick Dittman, who became known as the Enforcer because of his vigorous riding style. Dittman was 5 times the leading Queensland jockey before heading south to win 3 Sydney Crowns. He won just about every feature race on the eastern seaboard. In Western Australia, one of the finest riders was Frank Tiger Moore. Of course, there can never be a best of the best amongst jockeys, as all eras differ and everyone in every state has their own favourite. But when the votes are tallied on riders in the second half of the 20th century, one man, George Thomas Donald Moore, OBE, is most often nominated as the finest rider of his generation. Nicknamed Cotton Fingers for his ability to gently guide a horse to victory, George Moore won the Sydney Jockeys Premiership 10 times between 1957 and 1969. He set an Australian record, winning nearly 200 Group 1 races, although perhaps surprisingly, never a Melbourne Cup.
Yeah, I know, it was bad average, wasn't it? I should have won the year I ran third, Todd Carana.
Moore also proved himself on the international stage, winning the 1967 Epsom Derby here on Royal Palace. His other triumphs overseas included Europe's richest race, the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, as well as a French Derby and the Ascot Gold Cup.
I mean, he's just a magician. I mean, you know, he just had the most beautiful hands, and horses just travel so much better for him than anyone else. I haven't seen his likes again since.
Moore was just one of a long line of great Australians who set out to conquer the world. Edgar Britt, seen here winning the 1934 Sydney Cup on Broad Arrow, was the leading jockey in India for many years and rode more than 1,200 winners in England. Ron Hutchinson rode more than 1,000 winners in the UK, while Togo Johnston won 2,000 races in 9 countries, including 3 English derbies. Adelaide's top riding exports were Billy Pyers, who won major races in the USA and France, and Pat Glennon, who rode the Great Seabird in all his big wins. The unassuming Victorian Bill Williamson rode Dalray to victory in the 1952 Melbourne Cup before claiming 13 of the world's great classic races in Europe. Neville Selwood was the pin-up jockey in Australia before conquering Europe and riding Larkspur to victory in the English Derby.
Had a huge advantage in life as regards being a jockey. And right from the start, he was a golden boy of the turf.
Scobie Breesley was the leading rider in Victoria before taking the English jockey's crown 4 times. A hands and heels specialist, here's Scobie on the outside, fighting out a finish with his great rival, Lester Piggott. Breesley rarely needed or used a whip to get the best from his mounts.
We had a lot of big rows, poor old Scobie and I used to say to him, there ought to be a rule that you pull the whip on leaving the gate, Scope. And he used to get very upset because he'd hardly ever hit them with a whip.
Of the 3,250 winners in Scobie Breesley's career, more than 2,000 were in England. The modest South Australian Jim Johnson, who intrigued racegoers with his unusual but effective style of riding, came to Melbourne to ride Gaddam to victory in the 1963 Melbourne Cup. He would eventually stay and link up with brilliant gallopers Winfro, dual Melbourne Cup winner Rainlover, and the outstanding Tobin Bronze.
Tobin Bronze gradually makes up leeway to win by half a head in the last stride with Redcap third.
But the day he fondly remembers most is when he won the Queen's Cup on Aladdin's Lamp for trainer Colin Hayes, and he shook hands with royalty. All great jockeys possess a natural talent, but all of them will tell you that to master any trade, you need a good teacher. In Melbourne, trainer Frank King schooled, amongst many others, Darren Gauci, or the Gouch as he was known, whose early success gave him an almost rock star status.
It was hard, very hard. And at that time when I was when I was riding a lot of winners, and I was still very young, and thank God he just kept me working hard. He spent time with his kids, he looked after them, all of them, and especially with me, I was very grateful.
Morning. How are you? Very well, yourself? We missed that.
In Sydney, no teacher of apprentices was more revered than trainer Theo Green. Beginning in the 1960s, one of his first apprentices was Frank Powier, before going on to school a string of champion riders, including brilliant teenager Sydney Gordon Spinks.
Gordon, how long have you been riding?
Just on 18 months now.
And I guess that Port Joy's win would be one of your most important?
Yes, it was important.
Race 2 was the Jim Crack Stakes for 2-year-old fillies. Number 11, the Darby Munro trained Embracing, to be ridden by George Moore. However, at the finish, Port Joy took the lead soon after the start, was a clear leader for home, and ridden by S. Spinks, won by a length and 3/4 from the fast finish.
Listen closely to the names of the owners. It would be the beginning of a racing empire.
Todman, Port Joy is trained by E.C. Stanton for J.H. and R.W. Ingham.
Here we have ladies.
Then there was the boy from Mandurin.
How old are you, son?
17.
And have you been apprentice very long?
I've been riding 8 months.
Oh, ridden any winners?
Yeah, I've ridden 13 winners.
Quinton would win 8 Sydney premierships and have a hugely successful association with Sydney trainer Neville Begg. Other brilliant apprentices would follow. John Duggan, a Melbourne Cup and dual Golden Slipper winning rider who regularly finished high up in the Sydney Premiership. And arguably the best of them all, the record-breaking, ever-smiling Malcolm Johnson, whose brilliant career was often dogged by suspensions. One and all respected and heeded the advice of the man they called the boss.
They all were, my boys, dead set reliable. That's why they were in such demand type of thing. They were fit. They started work at 3:30 of a morning, and I always made sure they rested again before they rested their brain before they went to the races and had a sleep. And, you know, by the time we got to the races, they'd be fit and ready for whatever was in demand.
He was tough, but he was good. He was fair, probably the fairest person I've ever met. As he always used to say to us, if you don't help yourself, no one else will. And that sort of stuck in our head a little bit.
In the early 80s, there came the prodigiously talented Darren Beedman, who would rise to greatness.
When they made the boss, they threw away the mould. A very unique man. He was like a real father figure to the boys, and he was a very selfless type of person, very unassuming. But when the boss spoke, he spoke with authority.
In today's mass marketing of celebrity, it was perhaps inevitable that film star looks and rare talent would combine to make a star of Darren Beedman. Among his outstanding achievements are multiple Sydney Jockeys Premierships, 2 Melbourne Cups, and a record number of winners in one season.
I've tried to, think out, not be biased. And it's a photo finish, they hit the line, and I've got Darren Beedman on top. Yeah. George Moore, number 2. I think Darren was probably more composed than George. George had just the odd time let little things rattling, and Darren doesn't ride many bad races, and he's so strong.
Professional race riding was the exclusive domain of men until 1973, when the Dame Merlin Transition Handicap for female jockeys was held at Eagle Farm. Pam O'Neill rode in that race and, along with Linda Jones, would blaze the trail for women jockeys. For all the highs that jockeys experience, they're also dealt crushing blows. Race riding in the 19th century was a lowly paid profession and brutal affair, especially over rough tracks and in jumps races. In the modern era, the dangers have been reduced, but nothing can protect a rider from loss of concentration from a horse that shies or loses its footing.
It's a very dangerous sport when jockeys around 50 kilos and jockeys that are bigger and they're 10 kilos lighter than they should be, struggling to ride an animal that's half a tonne, you know, 450, 500 kilos, and doing it every day. You know, it's a very dangerous sport, as you well know.
One of the most publicised race deaths was that of champion Australian jockey Neville Selwood, killed in 1962 while riding in France. In 1993, popular jockey Ken Russell, affectionately known as Farmer, died of head injuries after another horse crashed into him in a race at Rose Hill.
Trouble. Twig has broken down.
Earlier that day, Peter Cook was involved in a nasty track accident.
The horse flipped over on top of me, and I'm in hospital at Westmead. And next thing, I'm waiting to be treated. A priest came and said Kenny was killed. It was a terrible day. Terrible day.
More than 300 jockeys have died in Australian race falls. Yet, even amidst adversity and heartbreak, there are moments of triumph, and arguably the most moving sporting victory seen in this country was played out in the Melbourne Cup of 2002. Damien Oliver had been booked to ride the Irish-trained Media Puzzle, but a week out from the Cup, his world was shattered when his older brother Jason was killed in a track accident. Racked with grief, Damien anguished for days whether to ride in the big race.
The easiest solution was to think what Jason would have thought about it. And I know myself, if I'd have been sitting at home watching that on the couch and that horse had won, he would have been cursing his brain out at me. So from that point of view, it was an easy decision to make.
Into the straight, and as Media Puzzle swept to the lead, Damien could sense the huge crowd was willing him to win.
Damien Oliver sends Media Puzzle to the lead ahead of Vinnie Rowe, who can't find, and back behind them is Beekeeper, Distinctly Secret, Fantastic, but Damien Oliver riding with the spirit of Jason, out by 3 on Media Puzzle. I think he's got the Cup won. Beekeeper, Mr. Prudent are running on from Vinnie Rowe, but it's Media Puzzle clear, and Media Puzzle, Damien and Dermot have done it. Media Puzzle beats Mr. Prudent, Beekeeper, Vinnie Rowe 4. It will be the most emotion-charged Melbourne Cup reception in history, and a race that will be remembered forever.
Obviously, Damien was, you know, overcome with emotion, and pretty well every jockey in the room was flooded with emotion. And there was so many hugs and pats on the back and a lot of tears in the room that day. I think most of us cried, you know. So very, very electrifying feeling in the air.
For their courage, daring and skill, jockeys will always be racing superstars, with a special place in the hearts of racing enthusiasts. Still ahead, champion horses and tenacious trainers. And next up, millions won and lost on and off the track by the gamblers.
Australia, millions of dollars change hands as punters try to pick a winner. Today, it's the off-course TAB where most of the bets are placed. But on course, the age-old tradition continues as the bookmakers match wits with the punters.
And where there's big money to be made, there will always be those who will try to devise a scheme to beat the system.
For most of the 19th century, bookmakers would wander around the racecourses, offering odds and taking bets on credit. Then, an English bookmaker in Melbourne, Robert Seaver, decided to stand in one place with a big bag, taking bets in cash and giving each cash punter a ticket. He won so much in his first year that his fellow bookies soon followed suit.
Bookmakers quite often held bags of, in those days, £50,000 or £100,000, which when you convert that to modern money, they were enormous holdings.
Historians record that the wealthy New South Wales parliamentarian and horse breeder, the Honourable James White, collected a fortune when his horse won the 1877 Melbourne Cup.
Well, James White was reputed to have taken, I think, £50,000 out of the bookmakers' bags for his win on Chester in the Melbourne Cup. So, I mean, putting that into perspective today, you're going into millions.
The bookmakers settled a big win publicly, in cash, while crowds looked on.
It created such a furore of how much money the bookmakers had to pay him that they did it publicly outside the Royal Exchange, I think it was in Melbourne. And every time that the £100 in those days was paid out, the public was cheering and things like that.
Those betting off course bought tickets in publican George Adams' Tattersall sweepstakes, or went to illegal totes such as the one run in Collingwood, Melbourne by the notorious John Wren. Eventually, the most popular off-course betting outlets became Starting Price, or SP Bookmakers. Bruce McHugh, who became Australia's biggest licensed bookmaker, remembers his family operated an illegal SP book out of their suburban general store.
So the customers would come in and they would have their bets wrapped up in newspaper with the money inside.
Bookmaker Mark Reed was 10 years old when he first worked for his mother's SP business in the Melbourne suburb of Fitzroy.
And my role at a stage was to get the prices, and a list of the prices from my mum. She'd take off the phone, which would be transferred from the racetrack, and then I'd race them up to the laneway behind the pub, and they'd be posted there, and the patrons of the pub would fall out of the pub and bet on the races in the laneway behind the pub.
The SP bookies were mostly superseded by the TAB, changing the dynamics of race gambling and, some say, draining much of the colour from the track.
In my punting days, the racetrack was just full of people who you could say stepped straight out of the pages of Damon Runyon. Taxi Jack, Louis the Pest, Dick the Greek, Ozzy the Barber, Jack the Crooner. I mean, they were there. There were scores of people who sort of lived off the racing industry.
But as popular as machine betting has become, the never-ending battle between punter and bookie continues. In the days when prize money was slim, trainers like TJ Smith made the bulk of their living from cleverly timed betting.
The wages were low, the prize money was low, the races were only on once a month. So, you know, unless you could set your horse up and say this is a good thing and get the punters, your punters, to back it, you know, it really was very difficult. So yes, Dad used to bet and became quite astute at it.
Inside information was often used by Melbourne Mick Bartley, one of the biggest gamblers in Australia, who controlled SP operations in Melbourne and Sydney. The respected bookmaker Arthur Browning, who pioneered interstate betting at racetracks, landed a famous betting plunge in 1946, winning £100,000 on his horse, Good Idea.
Now, it could have been exaggerated, but it certainly was a huge amount, and possibly the biggest amount ever won in a plunge on a horse in Sydney, taking into consideration inflation of all time.
Bookmaker Mark Reed's mother, Mabel, was a big gambler in Melbourne who won $400,000 on Galilee in the 1966 Melbourne Cup.
So my mother, on the Cup day, went to the races. Even though she had a game for 400,000, she went there and had another 20,000 each way on the day.
Bookmaker Bill Waterhouse had a series of legendary betting duels with Filipino millionaire horse owner Philippe the Babe Ismail, which featured the first single bet of $1 million on an Australian racetrack. Ismail's most successful plunge was Red Diver at Moonee Valley in 1968, when his commission agents placed massive bets with bookmakers all around Australia. Ismail was later banned from all Australian tracks and was forced to sell all his horses, including his Derby winner, Divide and Rule. That horse then landed a huge plunge when it won the 1970 Stradbroke. The plungers, suspected to be Ismail's agents, got good odds because Divide and Rule was reported to have performed poorly in track work. It was later alleged he'd worn heavy iron plates to slow his training times. Brisbane bookmaker Brian Ogilvie remembers the day he got stung when Grey Ghost won the 1958 Stradbroke.
Well, Grey Ghost, it was a very good betting race, now backing lots of horses, and Grey Ghost was 10-1. And all of a sudden this avalanche of money, cash came for it. And, you know, and in those days the bookies would accept a challenge with a punter. And as they took the 10s, it was 10s into 5s taken at the finish. It was probably the biggest plunge I've ever known, outside Divide and Rule, but it was trained by Jim Barker and George Barnes, the old professional fighter. He was his son-in-law, and he was spearheading a lot of the plunges.
In the early 1960s, the flamboyant George Edser, known as Hollywood for his snappy dress, was banned for a series of misdemeanours on racecourses and his links with apprentice jockeys. He was then forced to use a stepladder outside the course to watch the races.
He'd be peering over the fence with the best suit on and a cashmere coat and the best pair of Carl Zeiss glasses money could find, you know.
Some big punters pooled their resources and gambled as a syndicate, such as the group of wily horse experts the media dubbed the Legal Eagles. One of their members was Bob Charley, later to become chairman of the AJC.
But there were occasions, 4 occasions to my knowledge, where we backed every winner on the program.
Their first big win was the 1961 Doncaster at Randwick, won by Fine and Dandy.
And for some reason, the public and the bookmakers just thought he couldn't run the 1600. And we got 66-1 because he led all the way, and we won a lot of money.
Australia's biggest gamblers have gone into folklore, often with their own nicknames. Men like Brisbane's Eddie the Fireman Birchley, who'd walk around the betting rings with $200,000 in cash in his pockets, challenging bookmakers to name their limit. And the crowds would soon gather round him.
Not so much in Brisbane, but sometimes in Melbourne. I might have had nearly 100 people follow around and, you know, just to see what you're doing and that.
In the early 1980s, Mark Reed landed some of the biggest and most professionally organised plunges ever seen on an Australian racetrack, backing his horses Getting Closer and High Signal. The largest made headlines around Australia when, at Canterbury in 1982, commission agents, in a lead-up to the plunge, handed bookmakers personal letters from Reed, placing massive bets on Getting Closer.
And his PA, Barbara, had typed out all these letters. I think there was 20-odd letters, and they were basically a letter for every rails bookmaker that there was in Sydney. And you bear in mind that the Sydney ring was super strong at that time. It had all the top bookmakers, all the Waterhouses, the Bobby Blands, the McHughes, they were all there.
All the boys had their watch set for 7 minutes to 2, I'll never forget it. And then they go, he said, just keep backing it till you run out, till it gets to even money. Anyway, it was 200s into 7. They couldn't take any more.
And this big betting clock is going to come off, getting closer under the whip, is holding them at bay. A little win, getting closer by about a length and a half on the line.
Having pocketed over $1 million, Reed then plunged again on Getting Closer, with stable jockey Greg Hall aboard 3 weeks later at Flemington. This time he invited a television crew to record his challenges to his fellow big bookmakers at Rosehill, Bob Bland and Bruce McHugh, daring them on camera to accept his huge bets.
But Getting Closer, who landed a plunge last start, is going to win again today.
I say 200,000 to 50,000. Bob says, looks at the camera over my shoulder. Yes, Mark, thank you very much. I go to Bruce. The camera's on Bruce. 200,000 to 50,000. Thank you very much, Mark. 400,000 to 100,000. Not a bad start for next day. So topped up again, made another $1 million the next day when he ran.
Some of the biggest punters have been criminals, like the mafia drugs baron Robert Trimboli, who used gambling to launder his ill-gotten gains.
I remember one day at Rosehill, I saw him coming in and he had a present under his arm, wrapped up. And next minute I know he's having a payout and he's paying out of... So he's ripped the the covering off the present, it was a shoebox with money.
Of all the colourful and fearless punters who've challenged the bookmakers, it's unlikely any will ever match the betting of the man they called the Whale, Kerry Francis Bullmore Packer. His legendary duels with bookmaker Bruce McHugh began the day another bagman declined to take a big Packer bet.
I caught his eye and I was looking at him. He said, "Do you want the bet, son?" And I said, "Yes, Kerry." So, yeah, I said 40 to 20 such and such for Kerry Packer, and that's how it all started. So his first bet was $20,000 bet, and it just grew from there. And
Packer's bets moved into the multi-millions. At the Autumn Carnival at Randwick in 1987, just after he'd sold his television empire for $1 billion, Packer was reported to be losing a staggering $28 million, at least $60 million at today's values.
over that week, I think I held around about 100 million. I must have, because I remember I paid both the Treasury over $1 million and the AJC over $1 million.
At that carnival, Packer owned a horse in the Sydney Cup called Major Drive, for which the hot favourite was the Jeff Chapman-trained 3-year-old Myocard.
I presume Kerry would probably back Major Drive. And anyway, he came over and he said, "I'll have $7 million to $4 million on Myocard."
Major Drive's jockey, Greg Hall, was unaware his owner had bet heavily on Myocard. However, he did know his ride was being closely monitored, having received a message from the stewards passed on to him by the starter.
He said, "He's serious, mate." John's wreck. He said, "They're going to watch you the whole race." I said, "Oh, that's good of him." I said, "Well, watch me." I said, "Beautiful." I said, "Only 24 of us, they're only going to watch me." I said, "That's good." He said, "No, be careful." He said, "Don't be mucking around."
Find it out. Myocard in front. Major Drive inch by inch is wearing him down. Major Drive coming home better, and Major Drive got up to win the Sydney Cup.
Greg Hall was later invited to Packer's house, where the media mogul stood in his trophy room holding the Sydney Cup.
He puts the cup on the mantelpiece, and as he says, "Great ride." He said, "I'm really proud of you." He said, "My father would be proud of you." He said, "Fantastic." He plunks it down the mantelpiece. He said, "Even though I had $7 million on the second horse, you little bastard."
Hall also remembers the big man fondly, especially when he paid his winning jockeys a generous sling.
He said, "Good ride last Saturday." He said, "That was a good ride." He said, "Here's a bag of lollies for you." He said, "Well done, son, well done." He said, "Good on you, son," you know. And I go, "Oh, yeah, thanks, sir." And when I got into the limousine, I had a look into this bag of lollies because jockeys aren't allowed to eat lollies, you know. And I said, I love this man. I said, "I'm going to marry him." I said, "He's a beautiful man."
Bookmakers must record all bets, and sometimes Packer's biggest bets, often placed late in the day, were just too massive for the tired and overworked bookmaker's clerk to absorb.
He says 1.1 million to 800,000 Brentino Kerry Packer. And his clerk, who'd worked with him for decades, turned to Dad and he said, "How many bloody noughts in that?"
With so much money to be made on the racetrack, there's always been cheats attempting to rig races. One of the age-old scams is the ring-in, where a fast horse is secretly substituted for a slow one. At a country race meeting at Casterton in Victoria, a used car salesman, Rick Renzella, entered the good sprinter Regal Vista under the name of a poor performing horse named Royal School. Now this is Regal Vista on the inside, narrowly defeating Urey in the JJ Liston Stakes at Sandown in 1970. Not surprisingly, he easily won the Casterton race and the conspirators collected tens of thousands.
It was a long time in the planning, and of course they got away with it on the course. They didn't get away with it in the courts.
Some ring-ins are so obvious and clumsy that they're quickly exposed, like the notorious Fine Cotton affair in Brisbane in 1984. Millions were bet all over Australia on a galloper called Fine Cotton, which was actually the better performed horse, Bold Personality, with its lower legs painted white.
I think his fluctuations were 33s into about 7-2 or something like that. So we knew there was this monumental plunge on the horse.
This little horse has had 50 starts. You know, it hasn't got a reconditioned motor in it. No, it's another horse. And I've said, it's a ring-in.
Fine Cotton's kicking again on the inside. Fine Cotton and Harbour Gold. Fine Cotton's in front. They're drawing to the line. He's just in front. Fine Cotton, Harbour Gold lunge right on the line. They hit it all. Gee, this is close.
He won by a nose, he fell in. And when the race was over, there was a bit of commotion, and then there was the delay with the correct weight. They said, no, there's a delay, we're not paying correct weight, hang on to all tickets.
Trainer Hayden Haitana and used car salesman John the Phantom Gillespie were jailed for their roles in the affair. In Sydney, Chief Steward John Schreck flew to Tasmania to search for a major witness, the merchant bagger Ian Murray, who was fishing in remote mountains.
Mr Murray and I stood over away from the others and with a bottle of scotch and talked about how to, because it was cold, and talked about him coming back and why he should come back and give some evidence before the courts.
Murray testified that he'd placed a bet on the substitute horse for bookmaker Robbie Waterhouse.
I've no foreknowledge of the Fine Cotton ring-in, nor did I back Fine Cotton.
Robbie was accused of lying to authorities and was warned off along with several other bookmakers and punters. They were readmitted 14 years later. Race fixing was also believed to be behind the mysterious murder of Sydney trainer George Brown in 1984, 4 months before the Fine Cotton affair. Race gambling is also manipulated by doping heavily backed racehorses, a practice commonly known as nobbling. Doubles bookmakers saved a fortune when the hot favourite for the 1969 Melbourne Cup, Big Faloo, had to be withdrawn 39 minutes before the race. He was scouring badly, and it was later found someone had slipped the horse a heavy laxative.
He was a mess for about a week after. I thought he was going to die, actually. That's how bad it was. With the Danthron stomach ball that they gave him.
Years later, a strapper working for trainer Bart Cummings confessed to administering the drug. Today, tight controls and close checking by stewards make race fixing almost impossible. Next, a look at racing's powerful organisers and policemen, the men they call the bosses.
And merchants, judges and politicians, volunteers and privateers.
And behind the big bosses have been the officials, the starters, judges and stewards who run the races and enforce the rules to make sure all horses have a fair and even chance to win.
The first racing carnival around Sydney's Hyde Park in 1810 was such a success that plans were laid immediately for further annual carnivals. By the mid-1800s, races were being held regularly all around the continent.
And because this is a frontier country, wherever country settlements occurred, horse racing began, because all the young people working on the stations wanted to ride horses and compete against each other.
Many of the early races were steeplechases, and to this day, there are still those who prefer the thrill and spectacle of racing horses over the jumps, like Master Jumps trainer Jim Houlihan.
No, it's wonderful to me, the jumping part of it. There's a lot more challenge in jumping, training a jumper, than what there is in a flat horse, because a flat horse, all you're doing is teach him to, you're just training him, getting him a bit fitter to do what he's born to do. But the other way, you're teaching him. And I'm quite sure, and I'm convinced that most good horses really enjoy it.
But while jumps racing survives to this day in some states, it was flat racing that always had the popular support as a true test of speed and stamina. In 1861, Victoria, awash with gold rush money, staged the first Melbourne Cup with a massive prize of £700. The idea came from a club committeeman, Captain Frederick Standish, a heavy drinker and notorious gambler who'd fled England for the colonies after losing all his money. As racing became central to our way of life in both town and country, many high-minded and dedicated amateurs stepped in to administer the turf clubs and set the racing rules.
One of the most significant figures in that period was Sir Adrian Knox, who was the chairman of the AJC, and later on went on to be the Chief Justice of Australia. Now, Sir Adrian Knox really is responsible for writing the rules of racing as we know them today.
Among the many other great racing innovators was Sir Chester Manifold, the man they called the father of the TAB. A committeeman of the Victoria Racing Club for 35 years, 11 of them as chairman, he was a leading breeder and owner, his best horse being the champion steeplechaser Crisp.
And this is another file lap over the fences, and Crisp was won by 10 lengths to the...
Crisp, who was the best jumper in Australia, went to England and carried top weight in the Grand National and led over every fence and was only caught by Red Rum in the shadows of the post, and Red Rum then on to win the next two nationals. So Crisp was head and shoulders above the jumpers of that era, and a remarkable horse.
Sir Chester Manifold had seen how legalised off-course betting in New Zealand had provided a massive source of income to the racing industry. His campaigns for the introduction of the TAB into Victoria led to a royal commission and final government approval in 1961. Other states followed, and the revenue from TAB betting is now the lifeblood of modern racing. In the 20th century, racetracks flourished. Many also staged rough and ready pony races.
Pony was the height of horses was 14.2 ponies, 14.1, 14.2, 43 hands, 14.2 hands. That's how they measured horses, and that didn't mean that all horses couldn't race there, but there were certain races only for that size horses.
The pony races were eventually outlawed during the war, and sole rights to organise racing was left to the big thoroughbred clubs. The immediate post-war years saw massive crowds at all Australian tracks, including a record attendance of more than 93,000 at Randwick on Doncaster Day 1948. The club's committees were now racing's all-powerful administrator, a voluntary and often unenviable task.
It's a bit like politics. It's not something that you get much thanks for, and it's not... You can sort of look back and think, well, the industry's running smoothly. You may not be able to look at any particular achievements that you're proud of. It's just as long as the racing industry is running as it should do.
The frontline policemen of racing are the stewards, and the common penalty for jockeys who breach the rules is suspension. The most sensational outing was a life ban imposed on top jockey Mel Shoemaker following the running of the 1961 AJC Derby.
Inside the half furlong, Summer Fair takes a narrow lead. Blue Era fights back. Blue Era, Summer Fair going to the line together.
Shoemaker, who'd ridden winners of many of the top races, including a Melbourne Cup, was aboard Blue Era when he narrowly defeated Summer Fair, ridden by Tommy Hill. Hill fired in a shock protest, claiming that Shoemaker had grabbed his leg close to the finish.
I've got the stick in this hand, in the left hand, and I actually never grabbed him. And it was only 3 strides off the post. You can imagine it's only about 30 yards out, and I've locked him up. I've locked him up with my wrist.
Unbeknown to Shoemaker, a head-on film of the race had been taken for the first time that day. In the darkened room, the veteran chief steward, Jack Burke, watched in disbelief as the replay appeared to support Hill's claim.
You get a life for trying to win.
Shoemaker eventually returned to riding after 5 years. Jack Burke's successors at the AJC included John Schreck, otherwise nicknamed the Sheriff, for his aggressive approach to policing the races.
So I always tried to make people feel comfortable and I tried to treat people in front of me with dignity, not necessarily respect. I never asked anybody to respect me, but that's an crappy word, I think, respected, but I always treated people with dignity and courtesy and expected the same from them.
In Melbourne in the 1960s and 70s, one of the best known was VRC Chief Steward Jim Ahern.
He was always well ahead of his time in relation to the way he'd run inquiries and give people the opportunity of pleading in mitigation, all these sorts of... He was very much a forward-thinking person.
And Vanderham shortly afterwards takes the lead.
Ahern was famously unimpressed when stewards were ordered by administrators to consult jockeys on whether or not a wet track was safe for racing.
He thought racing stewards ran the race meeting on the day without any interference from anybody else at all. And he felt that he knew as much whether a track was safe for racing as anybody else.
Ahern was succeeded by Pat Lawler, a steward with a truly eagle eye. Not every jockey believe they've always had a fair deal from the stewards, especially when the ancient interstate rivalry reared its head.
I went in and I just walked straight in the steward's room and just put my bag down and opened up and started getting undressed there. They said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm in here all day, every time I'm down here, every race, so I may as well stay here than go into the jockey's room." I said, "Save the walk in an hour all the time."
Main topic is coming up by inches, and as they approach the...
Other key racing officials are the starters and the judges. In earlier times, the judge had the unenviable task of deciding the winner in a tight finish with the naked eye. The introduction of the photo finish camera in the mid-1940s would bring a new reliability to the job. Changes were also made to the way races were started. The first races began with the dropping of a flag and later by a strand start.
Of course, the first strands that I knew, there was only one strand across the track. And if you happen to jump real quick, sometimes it'll get you under the... it would certainly get the horse. And then when the sixth strand came in, they were very, very taut. When you hit them, you're in trouble. You get a gravel race on your face or anything like that.
Electric starting gates replaced the error-prone rubber barriers in the early 1950s. Keeping one step ahead of drug cheats has been another perennial battle for racing administrators. 57.5. The stewards today have a range of sophisticated technology, from multi-camera video vision to advances in mass chemical testing to keep one step ahead of the drug cheats.
We adopt world's best practice in just about everything we do. Our stewards are right up there, the best in the world. Our totalisator technology leads the world. The coverage of racing on television is first class.
Race day and they're away. Babes.
In the late 20th century, government stepped in to reorganise racing, and Australia today can fairly claim to be a world leader in the industry.
When you consider the number of meetings that are held every Saturday, we'll say, in Australia and covered by television, I mean, it's not done anywhere else in the world.
But Weekend Hustlers holding him at bay, and the true champion of racing wins it.
Still to come, the profiles of our greatest racehorses.
Horses is the coach who must bring a horse to peak condition, teach it to race, choose the most suitable events, and devise the tactics that will give it the best chance to win.
The most successful trainers are those who can get inside the mind of a horse, recognise its moods, understand its idiosyncrasies, and identify its strengths and weaknesses.
Perhaps the most outstanding trainer of the 19th century was Etienne de Maistre, who won a string of great races, including 5 Melbourne Cups. Close behind de Maistre was Thomas Payton, the first Australian to train the winners of 200 feature races. While Walter Higginbottom, who'd started his career as a jockey, trained 4 Melbourne Cup winners, including the mighty champion Carbine. The 20th century saw the rise of Jack Holt, also known as the Wizard of Mordialloc. He was the trainer of West Australian champ Eurythmic. And Heroic, which would become one of Australia's most influential sires. His son Hallmark, also trained by Holt, ridden by Jack O'Sullivan, seen here winning the Cup in 1933 over the luckless Shadow King.
Shadow King is coming fast and Tropical is forcing his way through on the rails. It's a magnificent...
Then there was the amazing James Scobie, who also trained 4 Melbourne Cup winners, the last being Trivalve in 1927. In later years, jockey Arthur Breasley would adopt the nickname Scobie through his admiration for the great trainer. Fred Hoisted, over 25 years, won a record 17 Melbourne training premierships. Hoisted had taken over the Kiwi galloper Rising Fast, seen here winning the 1955 Caulfield Cup. The previous year, Rising Fast had become the only horse to win the Cox Plate and the Caulfield and Melbourne Cups in the same year. 17 premierships was also the extraordinary record of Fred Best, who dominated Queensland racing for more than 30 years from the 1950s. Many great trainers started their working lives as jockeys. New Zealand-born horseman Maurice McCartan rode more than 1,000 winners, including one of the great upsets ever when he piloted Spear Chief to down the 40-1 on favourite Ajax in the 1939 Rawson Stakes at Rose Hill. When he turned his hand to training, McCartan won 5 Sydney premierships, putting the polish on the likes of Columnist, Delta, and of course the mighty sprinter Todman, winner of the first Golden Slipper. Todman was owned by Stanley Wootton, one of the most influential breeders of thoroughbreds in Australian history. Melbourne trainer Angus Armanasco got his major boost in racing when he was asked to take over the training of all of Wootton's horses, including Star Affair, seen winning the 1965 Cox Plate. And the outstanding speedster Biscay, which, as Roy Higgins recalls, had a deformed leg.
I'm looking at this thing walking out of his box. He had one leg turned in like that. One leg faced the other one like that. And he kept tripping over all the time. Lovely, docile horse he was. Hobbled out on the track. And he said, just let him breeze up a bit over a furlong down the back and get a feel of him. I come back and said, holy Lord, what have we got here? Oh, wasn't he a machine? Even in the early days. So this is just a freak.
As a sire, Biscay would pass on his freaky speed to some brilliant gallopers, including Bletchingley, which won 4 of his 5 starts before he too became a prolific sire. His most notable offspring, the champion Kingston Town.
Sedative on the outside is coming out, speeding fine, and Sedative hit the front.
But surprisingly, Armanasco nominates the sprinter Sedative, who had 14 wins, 5 at Group 1 level, at the top of his list.
I'm not saying the best galloper, but he was the best racehorse. He was the gutsiest thing I ever trained. Because most horses, don't matter how good they are, if they get knocked over, they change their attitude in that particular race at that particular time just instantly, that you couldn't throw him off cue.
The 1950s also saw the rise of the man many say was the greatest of all, anywhere, in any era. The amazing T.J. Smith, who won the Sydney Trainers Premiership every year from 1953 to 1985, a feat that will surely never be surpassed. Born in 1916, Thomas John Smith grew up in grinding poverty in the Riverina district of southwestern New South Wales. Tom began training a few country horses, and then in 1942 he acquired a horse that would decide his future, a wild and unruly animal named Bragger.
I was just hoping that I'd get enough money together and put it into a business, and hope to stay in for about 5 years and then retire from it and go keep in business. But I found out after about 5 years I got the bug when Bragger won 4 races straight.
Smith's first big race win was the 1949 AJC Derby with Playboy, ridden by a young George Moore. Tommy had first met Moore by chance on a train many years earlier.
He basically said, oh, you know, what are you going to Melbourne for? And George said, I'm going down there to become a jockey. And he said, what are you going for? Young Tom, and he said, I'm going down to become a trainer. And Dad said to him, oh, well, I'll train the Derby winner and you can ride it. Well, as it so happened, that's exactly what did happen.
Moore became Smith's #1 stable jockey, but it was a volatile relationship marked by regular angry separations. After one of their spats when Moore was riding freelance for other trainers, Smith suddenly called at the jockey's home.
Iris went to the door and here's TJ. And she said, it's TJ. I said, well, let him come in. So he come charging in. He said, I'm bloody sick of this. He said, they're cheering you and booing me. You better come back and ride for me again. That's true.
Smith had an unshakable belief in the importance of hard work to bring a horse to peak fitness. He was also progressive and daring. In 1956, at the New Zealand yearling sales, Smith purchased an unimpressive swayback for the bargain price of 750 guineas. But there was something about his game head and swinging walk that attracted Smith. His name? The Immortal Tulloch.
Red Anchor raced up the Street Cafe from Lord of Camelot and then King Delamere.
Tommy Smith trained the winners of thousands of races, including 2 Melbourne Cups, 3 Caulfield Cups, 7 WS Cox Plates, 6 Golden Slippers, and no fewer than 35 derbies. Smith's greatest talent was his ability to recognise a good horse and to spot subtle signs that a horse might have problems.
He could see things and he'd hear the gate landing on, the feet landing on the ground and say, look, that's not quite right, it's not. He's very, very smart. He's very good.
Rightfully, probably the biggest legend ever in the sport. He's the Bradman of... Bart will hate me saying that, but I think Tommy was the Bradman of racing. Bart's not far behind him, though.
Of course, there are those who argue that Cummings is Smith's equal. James Bartholomew Cummings was, as they say in racing parlance, bred in the purple, being the son of the great South Australian trainer Jim Cummings. Jim was perhaps best known as trainer of the 1950 Melbourne Cup winner Comic Court.
Comic Court's too good. Lennon can put his whip away. He's coasting home, racing on to win by 3 lengths from Chiquita. North Coast finishes brilliantly. That's 3rd placing from Bengolo.
Bart first became a national celebrity when he landed the Cornella in the 1965 Melbourne Cup, with Light Fingers and Zaima fighting out an exciting finish. He would go on to take the nickname the Cups King, winning a staggering 11 Melbourne Cups, possibly the greatest individual achievement by any Australian trainer. In 6 of them, he also trained the runner-up.
He's won it with cheap horses, he's won it with expensive horses, he's won it with geldings, he's won it with mares. And then if you look at the statistic, 11 Melbourne Cup wins in, what, around 40 years, I guess. So it's sort of better than 1 in 4. That 1 in 4 in a Melbourne Cup, that's as good as Bradman's 99.94 batting average.
Cummings' 250 Group 1 race wins include 6 Caulfield Cups, 3 Cox Plates, 4 Golden Slippers and 23 derbies.
Safely wins the Cup, count Shiver second.
Bob Charlie, I think, said the cleverest thing I've ever heard about Bart. Bob said to me, he said, if I was a horse, I'd like to be trained by Bart. And what he meant by that, the great thing about Bart is he's a coaxing trainer. He just quietly coaxes the best out of them. And, you know, you get a horse like Kingston Rule, won a Melbourne Cup, lovely looking horse, beautifully bred, but an incredibly nervy horse. And Dart somehow got him calm enough to run the 2 miles and run sensational time and win that.
Kingston Rule has won the Melbourne Cup by a length of fairness.
One of his most exciting gallopers was the great stayer Galilee.
Galilee raced to the front in a stride, and Galilee is coming away to win the Caulfield Cup.
He won the mile Touareg Handicap in the Caulfield Cup. He should have won the McKinnon Stakes when he won the Melbourne Cup. So he was an outstanding horse, great stayer. Same, he's the only horse to win a Caulfield Cup, Melbourne Cup and the Sydney Cup in 1 year, 1 season.
Yeah, count him on the dirt then. Trot him back to the half mile and count around on the dirt.
Just as Cummings followed his father into horse training, so it was perhaps inevitable that Tommy Smith's daughter would want to try to emulate her famous dad.
When I told him I wanted to be a trainer, he was furious, and he said, "You can't do that." He said, "It's not the right profession for you." And we had a terrible blue, and I walked out of the restaurant in tears that night. Anyway, the next morning he rang me, typical dad's fashion. He said, "If you're going to apply for a trainer's licence, apply for number 1. He said, "Don't start at the bottom, start at the top." And he said, "Make sure you price yourself accordingly."
But Gay would find that her road into the profession required more than a little tenacity. Because of her marriage to warned-off bookmaker Robbie Waterhouse, the AJC declined to issue her a licence.
And so I fought the AJC. It took 2.5 years, and it became known as the Waterhouse Act, and it entitled women who are in the workforce, like I was, to stand on our own 2 feet and be judged accordingly, not as an appendage of one's husband or one's partner. And so that was a milestone for working women in Australia.
Nothing like a Dane wins the Derby.
Gay Waterhouse went on to outstanding success, winning multiple premierships and setting a series of training records.
And Jackler wins the Cup. Jackler beat the Remus.
Along the way, she sought the help and support from the pioneer of female training, Betty Lane, who'd had her own battles to be allowed into the big time.
She had to train in the country for many years and prove herself. And Betty was a great mentor, and I asked her, you know, different things, and she was always very helpful. She was a wonderful lady. You were a really helpful, nice, open person that wanted me to succeed.
After beating the boys on the country tracks, Betty decided it was time to come home to the city.
I shouldn't say this about the AJC, but I will. Thought they were very, very kind. They said, "Oh, Miss Lane, you don't have to go on to a provisional. You can go straight to a number 2, which in those days was a big thing." So I said, "Thank you very much." I felt like saying I've earned it, but anyway.
Adelaide's Colin Hayes began his turf career as a jockey in amateur races before deciding to risk moving to professional training. After setting up his training stables at the Adelaide beachside suburb of Semaphore, Hayes made a radical move, establishing a revolutionary thoroughbred operation at an historic rural property, Lindsay Park, in the Barossa Valley.
We could breed our own horses and rear them and under the loveliest of conditions and nicest you could possibly get, and then train them here. We built training tracks, and it took me about 5 years to build the tracks and stables and the vet hospital and the lab and all the things that we've got.
Many of Hayes' owners deserted him, but he soon proved them wrong, going on to train more than 5,300 winners, including Belledale Ball in the Melbourne Cup for his longtime client, Robert Sangster.
And Belledale Ball wins the Melbourne Cup.
And the imported stallion at Talak, owned by Sheikh Hamdin bin Rashid Al Maktoum of Dubai. Hayes' vision to attract overseas interest to Australia eventually led Sheikh Hamdan's brother, Sheikh Mohammed, to expand his worldwide Dali interests. It has now become Australia's largest racing and breeding operation. In the early 1990s, Hayes handed over the Lindsay Park operations to his son David.
He never really sat down and gave me training lessons. I used to just follow him around a lot.
and I encourage my boys to do that, and I think it just rubs off. You know, he said, you know, one of his things, you always treat your horses like individuals. Nothing's black and white, and always be prepared to do subtle changes.
Success for David was instantaneous on Derby Day 1990 when he set a world record of 6 group race winners in one day.
Planet Ruler got up to beat Rodelva.
I'd only been training since August of that year, and I remember saying to my wife Prue as I walked into the races, I think I can win a couple of races today, you know, on the big show-off day, Derby Day. It's the day you really want to win, and to win 6 was just surreal. It was just fantastic.
Amongst them, the Group 1 McKinnon Stakes. The winner, Better Loosen Up, would soon take David to international success by winning the Japan Cup.
And Better Loosen Up has beaten Stylish Century by a long neck. 2 lengths away, third is Mr. Brooker.
David Hayes took out dozens of top races in Australia and had a successful stint in Hong Kong, where he won the Trainers' Premiership twice, amassing prize money in excess of 436 million Hong Kong dollars. Amongst David's best contemporaries is Lee Freedman, who swept onto the racing scene in the 1980s. Freedman had grown up on a horse stud before setting up as a trainer in Sydney and then moved to Melbourne with his father and brothers. Within a few months, the boys were devastated by their father's sudden death.
You know, it was a big challenge, but you know, often that makes you knuckle down. We probably, if we thought we were going to get away with having a lot of parental help, we mightn't have had as big a crack at it as we did. But we knew we had to. It was kind of we had to sink or swim. So fortunately, you know, a couple of decent horses came along in the first year or so, and that kind of got us going.
Terrific coming right on the outside. Cooks fights back.
Lee and his brothers found instant success.
Big and Terrific's going to win the cup for Lee Freedman.
And went on to claim 4 consecutive Golden Slippers and an amazing 5 Melbourne Cups.
And then Scalacci, it's Clever Zoe in front of
One horse closest to Lee's heart, the brilliant sprinter Scalacci.
But Scalacci, the big grey flash is going to win it. Scalacci from Clever's a ball. There's a ball. Citizen is down.
And of course there was his mighty Superimpose, who amazingly won back-to-back Doncasters and Epsoms, and then beat the best in the 1992 Cox Plate.
I don't think there was a better one run in the last 20 years. I think at that there was something like 8 or 9 Group 1 winners in the race, and they won something like 30 million in stakes money.
Superimpose, let's load the Superimpose won the Cox Plate.
The Sydney trainer Jack Denham entered racing's Hall of Fame after he had trained more than 3,000 winners. Amongst his finest horses, the extraordinary front-running champ, Might and Power.
Might and Power and Doremus getting to Might and Power. They hit the line photo.
Melbourne trainer Jeff Murphy was known to have some fiery arguments with jockeys when they returned to tell him they'd slaughtered his charge in the race. Nonetheless, he was a hugely successful horseman, always ranking amongst the top echelon of Melbourne trainers in his day. He won the Caulfield and Melbourne Cup double with Gurner's Lane and Victoria Derbies with Sovereign Red and Grosvenor, but his outstanding achievement was with the best of them all, Surround, the only 3-year-old filly to win the Cox Plate.
But Surround, the mighty champion, is striding right away, and Surround's won it by 3 lengths.
As with jockeys, horse trainers are often only as good as the horses that come their way. Luck certainly changed the life of Perth trotting trainer Fred Kersley.
If you would have asked me 10 years ago, could this have happened, I would have said no. I would have thought I'd still be chasing around some fairly slow ones at the trots, but along came Northerly and changed all that.
Sunline in front of Northerly and Viscount.
Kersley's greatest moment was watching Northerly defeat the champion mare Sunline in the Cox Plate.
The West draws as Northerly has won it from
To see him run her down certainly brought a lump to your throat. I mean, it's what you admire in a great racehorse, that ability to lift and come again.
Veteran trainer George Hanlon credits his success to a mixture of luck and good judgment.
George Hanlon is not only a great horseman, he's just, I think, you know, one of the great, if not the great character of the Australian turf. One of the things about George in his 80s, you'd see him in a country meeting or whatever, and he'd be staring intently at the horses parading in the mounting yard. And you'd look in the book and you'd say, George hasn't got a runner in this. But George would be looking for something.
What are the dangers? You've seen a bit of the draw.
Oh, well, I suppose Tottenham's doing too. He's got to be the hard one to beat now.
Adelaide's John Hawkes came to prominence in the early 70s when his smart filly, Toltrease, won the VRC Oaks.
Toltrease in front, however, near the line. It's hanging onto a narrow lead and it's won it from its stablemate, Little Papoose next.
Years later, he would link up with wealthy owners, the Chicken Kings, Jack and Bob Ingham, who helped him establish a massive four-state operation in the 1990s, setting prize money records and winning the Sydney Trainers Premiership 8 times. His best horses were Octagonal and his son Lonhro. We'll soon look back at the horses we've known and loved, from Farlap to Burnborough to Tulloch, Kingston Town and Mackay Diva. But coming up next, racing's colourful commentators.
I never doubted racing's place at the heart of Australian culture. They'd only need to look at the work of the tipsters, writers, painters, poets and race callers.
Some of us used a microphone. Others chose a camera, paintbrush, pen, typewriter or computer to capture and preserve the detail, drama, thrill and romance of Australian thoroughbred racing.
The earliest images of Australian racing were paintings, etchings and sketches. They captured the spectacle of those first racing carnivals and left us with lasting portraits of the finest horses. In 1909, Martin Stainforth arrived in Australia from England and established himself as one of the finest equine artists the world has known. Stainforth's paintings are renowned for capturing the true nature of the animal. He abhorred the early portraits of racehorses that extended and exaggerated the head and neck. The Australian racetrack has always been a place of curious characters, great exploits and high drama. Tales of comedy and tragedy have been carried far and wide in prose, poems and song.
Banjo Patterson, I think, was probably the best writer the horse ever had anywhere in the world, don't worry about Australia. I think because he rode himself and because he'd done it all and he loved it, something came through in those poems that has not been repeated, as far as I know, anywhere else in the world by anybody. They had a real galloping rhythm to them.
As soon as the first newspapers appeared in the colonies, so too did the form guides, detailed race descriptions and results, along with musings and sometimes stinging editorials. The best riders in every city have always had their dedicated following.
I think it falls into categories. I think Bert Lilly, who worked for a long while with me on the Daily Mirror and he'd mainly been on the Sydney Morning Herald, he was a great storyteller and a great hunter of news. He was particularly good and a great racing rider. I think, though, that probably the best writer was Pat Farrell, and Bumper Farrell, as we used to call him after the old footballer. But Pat Farrell was a great writer, he was a great wordsmith, and he had a great command of the English language.
In Melbourne, the chief racing writer for the Herald for more than 30 years was Jack Elliott. His predecessor at the Herald was Bert Wolfe, who often wrote under the pseudonym of Cardigan. Wolfe covered all the biggest racing stories of his era and was present at Farlap's death in America.
Thank you very much, John. This is Ken Howard, privileged to bring you the broadcast of the great race.
But of all those who've brought us images and descriptions of the sport of kings, none has been more popular than the broadcasters, with their full description style that remains unique in the world.
But it's Ricochet, Zepson.
Early race callers were barred from the track for fear they'd lower attendance revenue. but they soon found ingenious ways to call the races from outside the course. As each race unfolded, callers like the great Ken Howard would weave colourful expressions together to paint a mental picture for listeners.
What's this down the outside at 100 miles an hour underneath the arches and all this sort of stuff, you know, and here's something coming with a wet sail, and you can see the wet sail, and then he'd have a horse coming down the outside fence underneath the roses, and you could see the roses, and then he would bet London to a brick on that this is won in a very tight finish, and you sort of could see London and you could see the brick next to it. I mean, I am getting carried away a bit, but he brought this sport into our kitchen.
Ah yes, you can bet London to a brick on that they back the winner.
Thanks for having us at your place, and as we always say, remember, if you can't participate in sport, be a sport. Goodbye now.
Des Hoysted came from a famous racing family and made his mark calling races in Sydney, where he challenged the dominance of Ken Howard.
Bev in front, Riesling giving plenty, but Eyeliner's still good. Eyeliner first, Riesling second, CDS.
In Melbourne, the great Eric Welsh was able to combine accuracy with excitement.
Gamely, but far too late, and Russia strode in by a great march.
And people said nobody will ever replace Eric Welsh. And in the 50s, when he left to run a pub down at Mornington, Bill Collins came, and miracle of miracles, Bill Collins was better than Eric.
Bill Collins gained such a reputation for precision in his calling, he was known to one and all as the accurate one.
Ravener and Drought have drawn level with Imprimatur. Ravener on the inside puts his head in front. Ravener's won it.
Collins was really good, and he was a punter, so he knew the pain of losing, and it came through in his broadcast, which I think is good as long as you can harness it.
A young Brisbane caller, Alan Thomas, had been searching for his own style of calling and found it when he sat beside Collins the day he called the 1978 Victoria Derby at Flemington, won by the brilliant Dulcify.
And the Colin Hayes train Dulcify wins the Derby.
It changed the way I call forever. One day. Just the way he went about what he did. Just so relaxed, so accurate, and a great reader of a race.
Now going up on the outside, Blue Allen has gone. Crisp out jumped him a fortnight. That is the biggest jump I've ever seen. That would have cleared the Sydney Opera House, and that takes a bit of clearing.
Melbourne's Bert Bryant was famous for the entertainment he injected into his calls. Bryant even won an award for his hilarious call of the match race between Big Faloo, ridden by Roy Higgins, and Rain Lover, ridden by Pat Hyland.
About 2 or 3 weeks before, Pat Hyland called in home, and we're having a drink at my bar, and Bert Bryant walks in. And anyhow, my wife, Janine, she was all but due to have our first child. And he said, that's a girl. I said, you're kidding, it's not a girl, that's a boy. He said, no, I'll bet you it's a girl. I said, you're on. Now, we've had a pretty sizable bet, and Bert's there witnessing all this.
Poland, Rain Lover out in front. Holland got Higgins' money too over the birth of that baby, being a daughter and not a son. And you can bet your sweet life that Higgins goes after it back, and Holland is just as anxious to keep it because it's pretty hard to get. Well, on the outside, Big Faloo's got a long head in front. Rain Lover coming again. Big Faloo, Rain Lover, they go to the line together. Oh, photo. Big Faloo has won it by a nose. Big Faloo has won it. I feel anyway. Why, gee, I hope so. You'd hate to be wrong in a two-horse race. You'd have to give it up forever and go back to work.
Bert's clever and unusual expressions would have audiences across Australia in stitches.
When a horse would hang out or hang, Bert would pull this line hanging like Jimmy Hannon's teeth, or pulling like a Collins Street dentist. And no self-respecting lion would eat that horse, you know. And these lines at the right time, whether you're winning or losing, they entertained you.
A contemporary of Bryant and Collins was John Russell, who became known as the punter's friend.
Golden Black will win the cup. Golden Black has won it from Reckless. Hyperno.
John was different to both Bert Bryant and to Bill Collins, because John was the
the worker's mate, the every-go racegoer's mate. John never forgot a name, never has. He'll remember your name, he might have met you 30 or 40 years ago. But John had the common touch with the people, particularly at the track, which Bert and Bill probably didn't.
In Sydney, Ken Howard's successor was his longtime apprentice and stand-in John Tapp. Tapp's accuracy and good humour made him a favourite with radio listeners around Australia.
Superimpose, he's come through between horses, he's going to do it. It's history at Randwick. Superimpose.
And his easy manner also allowed him to become an accomplished television presenter. Tapp's principal contemporary was Ian Craig, who celebrated 40 years on the job, much of that time for the one radio station, Sydney's 2KY.
It was the week's excitement for so many people. I think that's why it has become so professional. We have tried to follow on the guys of yesteryear who were just so brilliant.
In Brisbane, the respected caller Vince Curry dominated commercial radio with his unmistakable style.
Winslow for the money. Winslow won brilliantly. Second harmonised. Third escape. Persian King.
The sound of racing in Brisbane for more than half a century was defined by turf writer Keith Nowd, who called for both the ABC and commercial radio.
It's the outgo. Bamber's coming from the clouds now on the outside. He's putting them in fast. And
the ABC also produced many great callers, including Jeff Marnie and Lockie Melville in Sydney and Melbourne's Joe Brown.
My first Melbourne Cup was Rimfire in '48. And little did I know then that I was going to stay and call 33 Melbourne Cups, which was a record breaking that of the late Ken Howard. And I held that record for 7 years, of which I was very proud, until the late Bill Collins came along and called 34.
Brown's apprentice was Greg Miles, the caller many say is today the best in Australia.
Reduced Choice is coming again. Testarossa has the fight. Reduced digs. He lunges and wins. Reduced Choice beats Testarossa. A magnificent guineas.
Radio dominated racing coverage for more than 50 years before television began to offer telecasts of the major carnivals.
They start to move in the line.
Today, television has become the dominant broadcasting medium through the satellites of Sky Channel. The painters and poets, writers and commentators have left us an indelible legacy of wonderful images recording the greatest moments in racing. We'll always remember the great callers who performed for us in the theatre of the mind. Next, the ups and downs that go with being a breeder and owner of racehorses.
And Valgo, the leader at the furlong pole. Top Spirit is coming again. Both riders are tired. So am I.
Horses is filled with challenges, great rewards and bitter disappointments.
So true. All thoroughbred breeders and buyers are on a quest for the perfect racehorse, a search for that rare, all-conquering steed of brilliant pace and breathtaking stamina.
In the 19th century, men with a pioneering spirit moved inland from the Sydney settlement. One of them was the intrepid John Thompson, who trekked through rugged country and came across a tranquil branch of the Hunter Valley. Here he found a natural amphitheatre sheltered by high rocky walls, where gentle rains swept over rich undulating grasslands. He immediately recognised it as a perfect place in which to breed and raise horses, and called it Widden, an Aboriginal word meaning stay, go no further. Anthony Thompson is the 7th generation of the Thompson family to operate the historic Widden stud.
No one's ever disputed the fact that Widden is the oldest commercial farm in the, or commercial thoroughbred property in the world, or even thoroughbred farm in the world, to be owned and run by the one family.
Like all great horse studs, Widden has had its golden periods. In the 1920s, it was home to the great Heroic, and his brilliant son Ajax was foaled there. In the decades that followed, it was the base for leading Australian-bred sires Todman, Vane and Bletchingley. The champion racehorse and sire Shannon was also bred in the Hunter Valley at the historic Kiora Stud. Shannon was sold to race and stand at stud abroad, a tradition established by champion Carbine, sold to the UK after he'd first proved himself at stud in Australia.
Carbine side Spearmint, who won the English Derby. To this day, he's the only down-under sire or bred horse to sire an English Derby winner.
World. So Carbine was not only a great influence on the racetrack here in Australia, but very much through the breeding industry right around the world. So he'd never be forgotten.
It should be noted that the champion Farlap's Carbine blood was the reason he was bought, sight unseen, and shipped to Australia. In Victoria, a great breeding pioneer was the wealthy financier and philanthropist Sol Green. He imported a foal called Comedy King, the first foreign-bred horse to win a Melbourne Cup.
Sol Green came from England as a penniless teenage lad, of Jewish descent of course. He gambled and backed a winner, and he decided to be a bookmaker.
In 1950, an outstanding judge of horses, Stanley Wootton, made a decision that would have spectacular effect on Australian thoroughbred breeding. He imported the English stallion Star Kingdom to stand at Barramel Stud next door to Widden.
From the day his first runners hit the track, he was a sensation and won numerous golden slippers. Every year his son or daughter would win the golden slipper.
A contemporary of Star Kingdom was the French stallion Wilkes, who stood at the Kelly family's Newhaven Park stud in southern New South Wales. Wilkes was sire of champion Vane and the prolific winner Winona Girl. The influence of Wilkes and Star Kingdom was eventually surpassed by an extraordinary American stallion. He was discovered when Arrowfield Stud's John Massara was overseas searching for a sire to carry on the bloodline of the world's greatest stallion, Northern Dancer.
It's at that time that we had met, about the same time that we'd met Coolmore, Stud of Ireland, who wanted to shuttle horses to Australia, and they said, "Are you looking at anything?" And we said, "Yes, we're looking at a horse called Danehill."
The shuttle stallion concept was to prove a spectacular success with Danehill. Massara then struck gold a second time with Danehill's son, Redute's Choice.
An amazing feat, and to have two champion stallions is, in one lifetime is pretty well unheard of.
Their breeding might be equal to anywhere in the world. And that's because of a decade and a half of the top stallions of the Northern Hemisphere had to come for a breeding season down here and bring the good bloodlines, and the results are now starting to show, particularly at 6 furlong races and less.
While some breed to race, others breed to sell, and for the buyers, the place to find that elusive champion is at the yearling sales. Australians have been horse trading since colonial days.
Last time, get you on the other side, done!
The Inglis family began selling horses in 1867 in Pitt Street, Sydney, before moving to the famous Newmarket stables at Randwick. Inglis now competes with the Magic Millions horse sales. When a young horse is led into the sale ring, the moment represents the end of a journey with 1,000 pitfalls along the way.
Selling horses is a nerve-wracking experience for most people. I do it a lot more than most, but it doesn't ever lose that sense of excitement or that challenge for me. It's nearly 3 years, or just 3 years worth of work to breed that particular horse in planning the mating, getting the foal and raising it, and you only get a couple of minutes in the sale ring.
Racing enthusiasts will argue about the importance of bloodlines as a guide to finding a champion. For trainer Bart Cummings, it's breeding first, but with one qualification.
Pedigree, you've got to research the pedigree, which is very, very important. The background of the family like humans, I suppose. I mean, fruit doesn't grow far from a tree. So if the relations are successful and the right cross, similar cross to the ones that have been successful, you're probably on the right track, but you still got to look like a racehorse.
All sales produce their share of great racehorses for both record prices and bargain buys. In one of racing's greatest rags to riches stories, cab driver and part-time country horse trainer Joe Janiak got Takeover Target for $1,250. Janiak allowed Takeover Target to mature, and he then took out Australia's top sprints, including the Newmarket Handicap.
Wider out, Jet Spur, Takeover Target in front, God's Own, Cape of Good Hope after it, but Takeover Target a half neck to God's Own.
Takeover Target went on to conquer the world's best, winning the prestigious King's Stand Sprint at Royal Ascot in England. A colourful and high-profile owner of the 1960s was coal baron Stan Fox, who came to racing when his wife Millie asked him to buy her a horse. The horse he bought was Nebo Road, one of the fastest sprinters of his generation and winner of the 1967 Newmarket Handicap.
But Nebo Road won it easily.
By far the biggest racing operation in Australia has been Woodlands, run by the Ingham brothers Jack and Bob, who made their fortune in the mass production of poultry meat. Taking over historic Woodlands stud in the Hunter Valley, the Inghams built Australia's largest team of racehorses. Jack Ingham died in 2003, and 5 years later Bob sold the entire Woodlands operation to the thoroughbred Dali Empire owned by Dubai ruler Sheikh Mohammed Al Maktoum. The reported price was $500 million.
What you got to remember is you're talking to someone that's got money that is unlimited. I still reckon I could have got $100 million more than I ended up getting, but it wasn't a bad figure, the one I got.
In April 2007, the multi-billion-dollar racing industry was nearly brought to its knees when inefficient quarantine controls in Sydney allowed the highly contagious equine influenza virus into Australia. Fortunately, through the fast action of racing's administrators and cooperation from everyone involved, the outbreak, though costly, was contained.
The impact on racing would have been devastating. You wouldn't have had in 3 years' time a crop of yearlings. You wouldn't have had in 4 years' time a crop of 2-year-olds. And in 5 years' time you wouldn't have had a crop of 3-year-olds. And the impact would have been felt for years.
Today, the ownership of racehorses has never been more popular, thanks to widespread syndication schemes. Coming up, we'll feature those select few thoroughbreds who carry the special title of champion.
Everyone who loves racing loves champion racehorses, but nobody loves a champion quite like an Australian. We cheer those who demolish their opposition, and we have a special respect for those who appear beaten but never give up.
It's time to look back at some of the great stayers, brilliant speedsters, and those who could win at any distance. Those horses that have captured our hearts over the past 200 years.
The most celebrated of our early racehorses was Archer, the tenacious stayer who won the first 2 Melbourne Cups. One of the legends about this grand campaigner was that he walked all the way from Nowra in New South Wales to compete in the Cup in 1861. However, the evidence now seems to show that he went by ship. Although there's always been great rivalry between New South Wales and Victoria, there was one horse they all agreed upon was the greatest. His name was the Thai expression for lightning, Phar Lap. Known across Australia as the Red Terror, he won 37 of his 51 starts, including his unforgettable victory in the 1930 Melbourne Cup. He was invincible against his own age, recording victories in the Rosehill Guineas, along with the AJC and Victoria Derbies and St Ledgers. When it came to weight for age class, he beat the best they served up to him: Chatham, Amunis, Mollison and Night March.
I think he's sure to do well in America if he gets, if he goes through the trip all right. I think he's sure to do very well, and I think he's sure to win his race because he's such a phenomenal horse, and I don't think that they've ever seen his equal.
Good luck, Farlap. Australia's with you. I'll say we are. Goodbye, old man.
Are off in the third running of the famous Acrocaliente handicap. Behemoth takes the lead. Everybody's eye follows Farlap.
He was taken to America, where a massive crowd turned out to see the Wonder Horse from Down Under triumph in the world's richest race at Agua Caliente in Mexico.
Elliott gives him his head. He settles down to the business of making a race out of it, and it's a walk away. And a new record of 2 minutes, 2 4/5 seconds, and the glorious total of $332,000 worth of winnings.
A few weeks later, he died mysteriously in California. The cause of death still argued about to this day. Some say he was accidentally given an overdose of arsenic, which was a common ingredient in horse tonics of the day. But Farlap's strapper, Tommy Woodcock, never doubted Farlap was killed by criminals.
Woodcock himself even named the crook. His nickname was the Brazilian. The Brazilian came across him in the stable, and Woodcock threatened him with the pitchfork. He said, "Get out of here, I'll stab you with the pitchfork." And the Brazilian said, "If you do that," he said, "you'll have the same fate as Farlap." And he went for his gun in his pocket.
Even though Farlap delivered a morale booster in the early years of the Great Depression, there are still those who insist that the greatest was another New Zealand-bred horse, Carbine.
He was by Muscat, and Carbine won the 1890 Melbourne Cup, a field of 38, and he carried the equivalent of 66 kilos of what would equate to our weight scales now. And he won the Cup in a canter, and they say the scenes that particular day at Flemington in 1890 were fantastic because the crowd went wild and they wanted to pinch some hair from his tail.
Between Carbine and Farlap was the great Gloaming. Remarkably, out of 67 starts, he won 57 of them, running second in the other 9, and the only time he was unplaced was when he fell. A common accolade bestowed upon thoroughbred mares is that they are the best since Wakeful, arguably the greatest mare ever, who was only unplaced 3 times in 44 starts. Following Farlap's death, there quickly emerged a replacement crowd favourite, a handsome chestnut with a silver mane and tail, and the stamina to win 2 Melbourne Cups, Peter Pan. And then came Ajax. Between November 1937 and March 1939, Ajax cleaned up with a spectacular 18 wins in a row, smashing a host of race and track records prior to his shock defeat in the Rawson Stakes at Rosehill. Following the Second World War, there emerged a galloper who electrified the racing public with his trademark whirlwind finishes. Burnborough was already a 6-year-old when he was brought down from Toowoomba to the Harry Plant stable in Sydney. He proceeded to win 15 races straight, including a remarkable victory with 63 kilos in the 1946 Newmarket Handicap.
Here he comes. What a stride, what a horse, what a finish. But it's too late. No, it isn't. He might do it. Foot by foot, inch by inch, he pegs the leader's back. Can he do it? He can, and he does.
4 starts later, he was sent to Brisbane and stormed home under 65.5 kilos in the Ahern Quality, which we now know as the Doomden 10,000.
He makes good horses look second-rate in a record-breaking dash for the judge. A clear winner by 2 lengths.
7 days later, he did the same in the 2,200-metre Doomben Cup with 68.5 kilos on his back. In quest of his 16th straight victory, somehow 108,000 fans crammed into Caulfield to see their idol compete in the Caulfield Cup. Despite the impost of 68 kilos over the 2,400 metre journey, Burnborough was sent out favourite at 7-4. From his wide barrier, jockey Athol Mully eased the champ back towards the rear of the field, and after a checkered passage, he finished hard into an unlucky 5th place. Trainer Plant and flamboyant owner Romano were furious at Mully's ride, as were the punters. Did Mully pull him up for big money, as it was later alleged?
No, I did not. The weight beat him in the Caulfield Cup. As everyone knows, he could not begin, and he could not begin with 10-10 on his back. There was 28 runners. He had a lot of interference, but there was no excuse. I don't think he could stay the mile and a half.
Burnborough had one more start in the McKinnon Stakes at Flemington and tragically broke down. His career was over.
He really was a champion, Burnborough. I think Burnborough was probably the best horse I've ever seen.
Burnborough was sent to Kentucky to stand at stud alongside another Australian champion, Shannon. A brilliant 1,600 metre specialist, Shannon won great races both here and in America, but ironically, he is best remembered for the race he lost by a nostril. It was the 1946 Epsom, and Shannon, hot favourite and carrying 61 kilos, was left hopelessly at the start.
As the barrier rises, there's a gasp of dismay. The favourite's left. Hundreds of thousands of pounds of public money goes down the drain or into the bookmakers' bags.
Darby told me, and didn't tell me once, he told me 1,000 times. Blame Jack Gaxiow, the starter. Darby said that I went to walk him in an open barrier. Now don't forget, I don't know how many runners, 20 runners, and they're spread across the track. He said, and Jack Gaxiow said to me, Darby, stop. He said, I grabbed, and as I did, he said, turn him out. And he said, as I turned him out, he let him go.
Shannon is second last, many lengths behind.
72,000 racegoers groaned in disbelief as jockey Darby Munro took off after the field.
Darby Munro rode one of his greatest races, and unquestionably it's the greatest performance I've ever seen on a racetrack anywhere.
Left half a furlong and still has a chance. Young Beaumont fights on, but they're picking him back. Blue Legend's getting at every stride, and look at Shannon. Shannon, Demon Dobbs riding, living up to his name. Shannon, he'll win. No, it's not to be.
A decade after Shannon's victories, a new super-fast wonder colt appeared. Todman, the inaugural Golden Slipper Stakes winner in 1957, set record times in 6 of his 10 wins. Season 56-57 also saw the emergence of a fresh candidate for the title of the greatest. If ever a racehorse could break the hearts of his opposition, it was Tulloch. Bought in New Zealand by trainer T.J. Smith, he scored a string of easy victories. In his first year of racing, he was defeated only by Todman's extraordinary speed in 2 short 2-year-old sprints. But few who were there will ever forget the day Tulloch beat Todman over 1,400 metres in the AJC Sires Produce. Todman was sent out the 6-1 on favourite.
So I knew Sella would go to the front and lead, but pull up. And I went up head and head with him. We went head and head. He got to about just over the rise. Away went Tulloch. And he won.
As a 3-year-old in 1957 and 1958, Tulloch swept all before him in a blitz that included perhaps the most spectacular victory in our turf history, the 57 Caulfield Cup.
He had 2 pounds more than weight for age. He covered the mile and a half in 2:26.9, which was, it's certainly an Australasian record, and I think it was the second fastest time in the world for a mile and a half.
Many keen judges firmly believed the champion 3-year-old would be a certainty in the Melbourne Cup of that year. But there was immense pressure, particularly from media baron Ezra Norton, that it would be unfair to start the 3-year-old in the gruelling 2-miler. Unfair to whom, one wonders? Norton owned the Metropolitan winner Straight Draw, Tulloch's rival in the Cup. Elderly owner and grazier Evelyn Haley relented to the pressure and ordered Tulloch scratching.
Well, I think there's no doubt in the world he would have won the Cup easily. There's no doubt about that, but I think the newspaper moguls up here at the time kept writing editorials saying, please don't crucify this great champion. And Mr. Haley, unfortunately for the public and then quite a few other people connected, listened to them, and of course he scratched him.
Well, I didn't want to scratch him. When I went up to the office, I thought to myself, I'm doing something wrong here, but everyone says I should be scratching him. Only for the press around home, around my house and things like that, I wouldn't have scratched him.
Straight Draw, with Noel McGrowdy aboard, won the Cup that year ahead of Prince Darius, the horse they'd nicknamed Tulloch's Shadow.
Tulloch as a 3-year-old won the equivalent. There were no Group 1s in those days, but if there were, he would have won 12 of them. Most good horses, most champion horses these days don't win 12 in a career. He won them as a 3-year-old.
Just when he appeared to be about to clearly stamp himself as the best ever, a terrible, baffling stomach illness struck the horse, and for the next 2 years, he was forced out of racing.
He scoured for months, and Tommy Smith has said plenty of times that he gave up on him, but Percy Sykes, the wonderful veterinary surgeon, he didn't give up, and he came up with an old-fashioned cure that he used to use on draft horses, and in the end it saved him.
Tulloch was amazing. He'd been away so long, he'd been near death. It was a very serious disease, and here he is coming back for his first run after nearly 2 years. His first run is in a weight for age race, which these days would be class Group 1 if it was still around the Queen's Plate. Over 10 furlongs, not 6 or 7, 10 furlongs, against some very good horses, including a cracking weight for age horse called Lord.
He's got his head in front. Lord is coming again. Lord and Tulloch are going to the line, absolutely locked together, and they hit the line. Fogo, and I'll give it to Tulloch.
The race produced one of the most emotional moments in Australian turf history when Tulloch's number went into the frame.
I just found the tears running down my cheeks. I felt so damn stupid. And I went down behind the stand, way away from everybody. And the noise of people thumping, 90-odd thousand people thumping their feet on the ground, it was an incredible sound.
In an extraordinary career, he was unplaced only once in 53 starts, bowing out in magnificent style by winning the 1961 Brisbane Cup under a crushing weight with George Moore aboard.
Look, I rode all over the world. He was the best horse I ever put my leg on. And not by a little bit, by a big bit. Yeah. And I rode some of the champions in England and in France.
Well, I never thought I would ever think to mention a horse that might be somewhere near Tulloch, but by Joe's Kingston Town was a freak of a horse because he was always lame and he came into these races half-trained, and by Josie's record shows us what a racehorse he was.
Johnston has a quick peep round. He shakes up the jab. Away he goes.
This handsome black won 30 races, including 14 majors, and was unplaced only 4 times in 41 starts. Most remembered is his unequalled 3 successive victories in the Cox Plate, the last and most famous in 1982, when everyone, including his jockey, thought he was struggling.
He wasn't his old brilliant self, but it's like the old story, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and that's what he did. His brilliant best came out there at the 600 when all the pressure was on him and I was able to get out.
Most can remember the accurate one, broadcast to Bill Collins' famous race call saying, "Kingston Town can't win." And he was not alone.
Raven at Kingston Town can't win. 200 to go and my X-Men straightened up. Took the lead here from Fearless Bride. Down the outside, Grosvenor and Kingston Town's coming now. My X-Men in front. Raven at Kingston Town flying. Kingston Town's grabbed the lead. A great win.
Kingston Town stands proudly in the company of Australia's greatest. Carbine, Farlap, Burnborough, Tulloch and more recently Mackay Diva. It was a memorable day in 1967 when the popular middle distance champion Tobin Bronze carried 61.5 kilos to an heroic victory in the Caulfield Cup.
But Tobin is clear with a half furlong to go. Down the outside, Garson and Pat the way and Red-Handed. Red-Handed is flying. Tobin Bronze just in front from Red-Handed and won. Tobin Bronze won it by a half a neck, I'd say.
His record included a Cox Plate and an amazing victory in the Doncaster when ridden by J.J. Miller. His fans were saddened when he was sold to American interests. Roy Higgins retains an undying affection for Light Fingers, the gutsy mare on whom he won the 1965 Melbourne Cup.
She was a great mare. She was a great mare. Still my favourite today, and I'll take her to my grave. You know, she was a jockey's dream. She made ordinary jockeys look good.
There's something special about those gutsy girls that captures the hearts of racegoers. Many believe that the best mares have a mean streak in them, like Flight, whose consistency over 5 seasons was remarkable, considering she was racing against the likes of Shannon, Russia, Royal Gem and the mighty Burnborough. The temperamental but brilliant mare Emancipation, who, at the age of 3, won a Doncaster before her unforgettable Sydney Autumn campaign of '84, culminating here in the All-Age Stakes.
And Emancipation strode home to win it well.
She was an easy horse to handle. She'd kick and she'd bite, and she was always a bit of a handful.
And then there was the mare who crossed the Tasman and was about as friendly as an all-black Harker. The winner of 32 of her 48 starts, Sunline was unplaced only 4 times and garnered $11 million in prize money. She was named Australian Horse of the Year, a record 3 times in succession from 1999 to 2001.
But Sunline will hold on and win all the way. Sunline beat Tie the Knot by 2.
It was pure speed that elevated a handsome chestnut called Vane to racing immortality. At 2, he took out the 1969 Golden Slipper Stakes by 4 lengths and the Champagne Stakes by 10 lengths in record time. But his finest achievements came during the 1969 Victorian Spring Carnival, when he won the Craven A Stakes, or the Salinger as we know it today, here by 12 lengths. The Linlithgow Stakes by 6 lengths in record time, and the George Adams Handicap carrying a record 4.5 kilos over weight for age, all in the space of 7 days. In the early 1970s, racing crowds had their hearts captured by the horse they called the Gundawindi Grey. Gunsynd was unfashionably bred and sold for a mere $1,300 to a group of friends from the Queensland border town. Unusually vain with a sense of self-importance and knowing how to pose and bow for the camera, Gunsynd was most noted for his tenacity.
Gunsynd never left a photographer in doubt. Is there one on the left, sir? There were 3 of them.
He hated to give in. Like the time ridden by Kevin Langby, he was narrowly defeated by his old rival Triton in the 1972 Epsom.
Those 2 horses got together at the top of the straight, the grey and the big baldy face of Triton, and they fought it out all the way up the straight. And I got the decision, or Triton got the decision, by a very small margin, and I know I only got a half a stride past the post, and Gunsynd had his head in front.
In the late 1970s, the big sprint races were dominated by the amazing Manicato, a huge muscular chestnut who was unplaced in only 5 of his 47 starts.
Manicato wins at a length and a quarter, Smoky.
I don't think I've ever seen a better sprinter than Manicato. Like, he was a chest on him like
you wouldn't believe, you know, great big strong chested horse, typical sprinting horse, a wonderful sprinting horse.
He was trained by Bob Hoisted, son of the legendary Fred. Trainer Colin Hayes believed his best horse was Dulcify, who won his first race at the amazing odds of 300 to 1. But the best was yet to come, an AJC and Victoria Derby, an Australian Cup, and probably his most spectacular performance, the Cox Plate of 1979.
Dulcify by 6 lengths to Chivalry.
Dulcify then easily won the McKinnon Stakes and was set out 3 to 1 favourite in the 79 Melbourne Cup. Tragically, it was to be his last race. He was travelling easily when galloped on by the eventual winner Hyperno, breaking his pelvis and eased out of the race.
And I saw him falter and start to drop out. And Thompson rode him along for a bit and realised there was something wrong, and then eased him down as they straightened up and got off him. And I went down to the top of the straight, and it was obviously the horse was terribly injured. There was not much chance for him.
The crowd of over 90,000 watched in silence as Dulcify was put down. Colin Hayes was inconsolable. In some eras, horses can be remembered more for how they fought out a finish. One famous finish, the extraordinary triple dead heat in the 1956 Hotham Handicap.
But our Waverley Star, he got a half length of Bone Crusher. He's gone for the...
In the 1986 Cox Plate, 2 horses staged a mammoth duel from the 800 metres. One was the brilliant Queensland-owned Our Waverley Star, the other the tenacious New Zealander Bone Crusher.
It was like 2 boxers, you know, like Ali and Fraser in the last round, and they're both exhausted and they're just standing face to face. There's no science in it at all, and they're just throwing punches at each other. And that's what these 2 did.
The roars of the crowd, he races up to Our Waverley Star.
I just put the glasses right on Bone Crusher and you could see the, I'm not kidding you, you could see the fire in his eye.
Nothing in it. Our Waverley Star, the round Bone Crusher, the outside, and Bone Crusher places into equine immortality.
The autumn of 1986 also saw the dazzling Western Australian sprinter Placid Arc make history when he became the first horse ever to win the Lightning, Oakley and Newmarket in the same season.
Placid Arc's made it a magnificent treble.
Queensland was the place where New Zealander Rough Habit claimed many of his finest victories: a Derby, 2 Stradbrokes, a record 3 Doomben Cups, and the emotional farewell to his spectacular career in the PJ O'Shea Stakes.
A champion rider, a champion horse, he bolts in Rough Habit.
For all the great horses who come from behind, there are always a few who hate to be headed, the so-called front-runners. The greatest was undoubtedly Might and Power, who certainly lived up to his name, winning a then prize money record of more than $5 million. He has rightly earned his place in the Australian Racing Hall of Fame. Might and Power was rated the world's best stayer in 1997 after he led all the way to take the Caulfield and Melbourne Cups double. He again led all the way to win the 1998 Cox Plate.
Might and Power in front. He's going to get it. The earth starts to rumble. Might and Power takes the Cox Plate a length and a half Northern Drake.
Once in a while, there comes along a horse that will change the lives of those involved, like the unconventional Queensland trio of Vo Rogue, trainer Vic Rail and jockey Cyril Small.
They'll just do anything for you.
So often the courageous Vo Rogue would race away with big leads and break the hearts of those trying to catch him.
Vo Rogue wins at a length, better loosen up.
In the mid-1990s, crowds turned out to see Octagonal, the champion 3-year-old and Australian Horse of the Year in 1996.
Saintly and Octagonal, Beedman throwing everything at Octagonal, he gets there, yes, Octagonal wins the Derby. Octagonal again by a neck to Saintly, Falonte third, Royson fourth.
Octagonal stood at stud with moderate success, but he did produce one son named Lonro, who some say was better than his dad.
He was just a fabulous horse. He was a fabulous looker, and he just had that sprint, electrifying sprint, and it was something that, you know, Octagonal didn't have.
Few will ever forget Lonhro's stirring courage and determination in the Australian Cup of 2004, when he was suddenly blocked on his run at the home turn and then checked again in the straight.
There's the gap coming for Lonhro. Sound Action tries to pocket him. Bateman in a bit of trouble trying to force through. He got checked, the champ, and Sound Action hitting the front now from Mummified. Lonhro, the champion's in desperate trouble.
You could just feel him over the last 150 metres, that horse that was inside of him, you could feel him saying, "You are not going to beat me," and you could just feel every muscle in his body just reaching to get there, and just an amazing win.
Trouble, Del Zayo's gone past him, 150 to go, he's got to the outside, Del Zayo in front, the crowd roaring, go Lonhro, go, but the 3-year-old's in front, Del Zayo, Lonhro, he's coming, he's going to get there, yes, Lonhro won it, what a champion, what a way to go, he beat Del Zayo.
I've got that in the history room on the tape, and I reckon I've watched it 1,000 times. It's just fabulous.